I wonder how many of you who are listening in on this talk have heard of the English novelist Iris Murdoch. She was a prolific writer. I think she wrote over 40 novels, won the Booker Prize for a novel called The Sea, published sometime, as I recall, in the late 1980s. And she was a professor of philosophy at Oxford University as well. This talk is not about one of her novels. This talk is about a book called Elegy for Iris by John Bailey. John Bailey himself was a very distinguished professor of English, a literary critic who wrote on a fairly vast array of subjects, all having to do largely with literature. But he was also quite prolific. And they had an extraordinary marriage. I want to say that this particular talk and the book is not really just for those who are married. And the talk is not about how to lead a good married life. Um, this is not one of those books which tells you the 7 successful steps to a good marriage. You know, the kind of book that you find when you go to so-called bookstores, uh, where you largely find books on self-help books and books having to do with, horror movies and sports and books that help you prepare for exams. A bookstore, that is to say, has everything except books that are worth really reading. Um, I know that some of you will find this very cynical, but nevertheless, or perhaps elitist, but nonetheless, one has one's own ideas of what constitutes good books. And I can say with some confidence, having gone into bookstores my entire life, that there are entire sections where you find tons of books on the 7 or 10 or 12 steps to a happy life or a happy marriage, or 10 ways to keep your husband happy or your wife happy, right? 10 ways to make yourself attractive to a member of the opposite sex, 15 ways to avoid depression, etc., etc. I think if you read a book like this one, Elegy for Iris, you'll certainly get enough ideas about what makes for at least an interesting marriage, a marriage that is ethically, intellectually, spiritually nourishing for both people in the marriage. I think that that is what makes this book really arresting, that this was a marriage that was nourishing for both, which is not to say that there may not have been difficult moments in it. And this is an unflinching portrait. It's a very unusual one because he wrote this elegy, John Bailey, for his wife, Iris, when she was still alive, but not in a position to be able to almost comprehend anything. She didn't even recall any of her books. She didn't recall what all that she had accomplished and all that she was renowned for. She was a woman who was stricken by Alzheimer's. Right? And it's, as I said, an unflinching portrait because he has the courage to show her as she declined and what it meant to him and how he had to live with her. He describes at various points, particularly in the last 15, 20 pages, that she was nearly helpless in most matters. She couldn't put her on put on her own underwear or her clothes. He had to help her bathe. He had to help her with nearly everything, right? But this was a marriage which, as I said, was a marriage that was a doting marriage, a marriage where there was an extraordinary tolerance on both sides. And he doesn't tidy up her image. There are books of this kind which are written by a son or a daughter or a spouse, very often will tidy up the image of the person they're writing about, will remove the warts, remove some of the unpleasant things. Not that there was necessarily anything unpleasant about Iris. I mean, that's one of the things that one learns in this book, that she was a person who was, a person who remained on an even keel, a person of some equanimity. And he says, for example, that he knows that she, had other affairs, but they were fleeting affairs because they both nourished each other, right? And for those of you who are interested in delving into the life of Iris, besides reading her novels, Iris Murdoch, you can also turn to a film that was made, which is really based on this book, a, a fairly well-known film made in 2001 called Iris, starring Judy Dench and Kate Winslet. And the film was made before John Bailey himself had passed on. John Bailey also passed on in 2015, the author of the book, and her husband. So, what can I say about this book? There was a critical remark made by Gertrude Himmelfarb, a historian and sort of essayist. I think a historian is the best way to describe her. She was at Cambridge University, I believe, or perhaps Oxford. I don't remember. I think it might have been Cambridge for a very long period of time. And I recall that she had said that it was a very curious elegy that John Bailey had written, because it was really a kind of a portrait uh, of John himself. It was a book that was written. She thought that there was an element of narcissism because it was really a homage to him, and the way he, if I may use this phrase, I don't recall that Himmelfarb used this phrase, how he put up with her, particularly after she started declining and became seriously um, incapable of looking after herself after the Alzheimer's, continued to progress. Uh, so what are the circumstances, very briefly, under which they met? And let me discuss just a few passages in this book to give you a little flavor of it. It's very elegantly written. It's also quite funny in parts, which I think is rather commendable. And when I say it's funny, one doesn't expect a book like that necessarily to be funny, but this is what I meant, and I think this is obviously a testament to the gifts of the writer John Bailey himself. And so I'll go straight into that in a moment, into that humorous part. This will be, like most of my talks, a kind of a meandering talk, because this is not, a formal, review of the book where I take elaborate notes and then try to structure an argument. I'm speaking as I usually do, really off the cuff, and speaking my mind to all of you here who are going to be listening to this talk. So the circumstances under which they met were simply this, that one evening he was standing in his, I think, college room, looking out of the window, and he saw this woman on a bicycle. All right. And he looks at her and is really struck by her. And lo and behold, and this is what is called serendipity. That same evening, or perhaps a few evenings later, he is invited to have dinner with one of his tutors, as they're called, at Oxford and Cambridge, right? Might have been one of his professors. In fact, it was a professor. So he's invited to have dinner at the professor's lodgings. She is invited some of her other students. They're all female students except John Bailey. And standing in one corner of that room is the same woman that he saw on the bicycle, and that image had never left his mind. And he had really wanted to meet her. And now he's invited to dinner, and there she is, right? And it was Iris Murdoch. And so they have a brief conversation. And then once again, this is, I suppose, what is called serendipity, that he's invited to dinner by a couple, and they've invited only one other person, and that person happens to be Iris Murdoch. And this is how they came to really know each other. And it wasn't very long after that that they fell into bed together, right? So there was actually some kind of college dance that I think he took her to that college dance. Neither of them were, I think, very good dancers, perhaps. And he has a kind of a rambling, interesting, humorous account of, their drinking together, and then then she comes back to his place, um, and then they slept together. Um, but she was still going out with other men as well. He was aware of that. And what is striking is that you don't really see, in that sense, an element of jealousy here, you know. But there are also things that that constantly keep on coming up. The same episode keeps on, or the same memory, I should say, keeps on coming up. That she had another suitor who was very much interested in her, and he had invited Iris, which is just around the time that she was getting to know John Bailey. He had invited Iris for lunch, and this uh, person who was perhaps a tutor, he was actually staying in the apartment of a professor who had gone away on leave. This professor would go on leave for extended periods of time, and then uh, his lodgings, his apartment would be occupied by this tutor, and this person who clearly had some kind of attraction for Iris invited her for lunch, and apparently she had said, "May I please bring John, my friend John Bailey, with me?" And that man who had given her that lunch invitation gallantly said, "Well, yes, of course you may, um, but uh, John suspects that ruined that person's plans, because he really was a suitor and was hoping to have the afternoon to spend talking to her." And he's constantly this, but the memory of this is something that you find occurring in this book every 50 pages or so. It's the episode is mentioned a few times because John simply is trying to recall episodes from their lives. Um, one of the things that John and Iris often did was to swim together, and they would take off all their clothes and they would wade into the river somewhere. And he describes this one very funny incident when I think they had gone to Italy on a vacation to some rural part. There's a stream flowing by there, a river flowing by. No one is in sight. They take off all their clothes, they go into it. But when they come out of it, lo and behold, once again, to use that phrase, you know, there are these bunch of boys standing there, gawking at them, right? Uh, and I was sort of reminded a little bit of that scene from the Puranic literature, from the Bhagavatam, Sri Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavata Puran, although you find this particular episode that um, I'm talking about in a vast array of the Puranic texts. The episode I'm talking about is the Vastraharan, the theft of the clothes, because here also they describe how, one of these boys, Bailey describes, took some of the clothes and kind of like dangles them, and they're feeling a little bit, ashamed, feeling a little bit uncertain about whether what to do now. But anyhow, it's a humorous kind of episode, because what he's really recalling is the carefree days they spent together, and the things that they enjoyed together, which included swimming. Um, Now, so here's the funny part that I really wanted to begin with. I'll mention this episode, a few others as well. And this is pages 157, 58. So here he is talking about what, if I may call, is the philosophy of the bed. I am here echoing Edgar Allan Poe, a famous essay on the philosophy of furniture. All right. So up inside the bed, secure and as it seemed protected from the world, I could feel that this was marriage, the true nirvana of the wedded state. One of the books I reviewed in that dreamy time was by Pamela Hanford Johnson, a very capable novelist of the 50s, wife of the scientist and PR man C.P. Snow, who also wrote novels. So C.P. Snow wrote that book called The Two Cultures, right? A book which is about the culture of science and on the other hand, the culture of the arts and humanities, and these two cultures never meet, right? And that book became famous in its own right as a kind of a diagnosis of a certain kind of problem in the intellectual world, right? Power was his chief interest. Bailey says the Masters, concerning the power struggle among the heads of a college, was an early and original specimen of the campus novel. The most famous, perhaps, set of books, which written by any one novelist, each of which is a campus novel, was, of course, the books written by David Lodge, right? The British Museum is falling down. And what was that other book? A Small World, I think it was called, something like that. I read all of these sometime around 1989, 90. Snow's wife had what for me were more subtle interests, and I enjoyed her novel, the last of a trilogy, right? This early one, advertised on the jacket, and which I had not read, had its title borrowed from a poem of Donne's. That's John Donne. This bed thy center. That's the name of the poem. I felt that this was a good omen, though I discovered later that the author had intended it satirically. The novel was an early feminist outcry against the sexual and domestic subordination of women. For me, domestication on and in the bed was sheer bliss. So Bailey's talks about how he just loves to be in bed. Not necessarily, making love all the time in the bed, just lying down and just reading and working. I mean, and in fact, lots of people have written all their books virtually on the bed. Certainly, Iris did not at all regard the great bed as her center, right? So here, the book centers back on Iris. Every time he seems to be speaking about something, it centers back on Iris. And the knowledge of that seemed perfectly harmonious to me, too. Let me repeat that. Certainly, Iris did not at all regard the great bed as her center, and the knowledge of that seemed perfectly harmonious to me, too. Our marriage was shared, but the bed was mine. Iris would sit beside it after bringing me barley water and orange jelly, the only things that the ulcerated glands in my throat would tolerate, right? So this is when he was ill on a particular occasion. As I got better, we seemed to live mostly on poached eggs. Iris developed a skill on doing those which I have since envied. I have never been able to master it as she did. I regard skill in poaching an egg as the ultimate cooking test. How very English, right? Poached eggs. This is the ultimate cooking test. I dare say that people who really like poached eggs do think that making a very good poached egg is not as easy as one imagines it is. What I appreciated too was Iris's complete indifference to the womanly image of a helpmate. Right? This gives you this paragraph gives you the full flavor of how he writes, and it gives you the flavor of what kind of woman she was. That she's devoted to him, but not devoted in the ordinary sense of the term, right? That she doesn't think of herself as, you know, a helpmate, that she has this wifely role to play. She was not in the least a Florence Nightingale. She just looked after me. She just, the just is important. She just looked after me. And she did so. I could see from her face that her mind was far away, pursuing the plot of the story she was engaged on. Right? So, you know, he's ill, he's in bed, she's looking after him, but her mind is somewhere else. She found no bother at all in getting on with it while I was ill. In fact, it was a very productive time for her, and indeed told me later that she owed the genesis of that particular tale. So this is a novel that, you know, that he's describing, that she had written, or a story she'd written, to that quiet time my illness had brought us both, right? So his illness is very productive for her. And here's the punchline: that gave me such satisfaction that I at once fell ill again, right? That, hey, every time I fall ill, she writes a wonderful story or a novel. Maybe I should just keep on falling ill. Right? So this is what I meant, that the book has a great deal of charm and humor, tells you a lot about her. So how should one really think about this book? It's really about, how does one live in a marriage? Okay, how you can be together with someone and yet be all by yourself, and be entirely happy, both being entirely by yourself and being together. What is the solitude in marriage is critically important. That's one of the things that he's trying to point out, right? You don't always have to be together. And of course, in this age and day, I will not say the names of people I know who are married to each other. And if the husband or wife goes somewhere, well, every half an hour there's a text, you know, have you reached where you're going? Are you okay? You know, needless amount of texting, calling, all of that, right? And supposedly that is showing the attachment that the person has to their spouse. What John Bailey says is something rather quite different. Chapter 5. I never missed Iris, and I don't think in that sense she ever missed me. Separation, when it happens, was itself a kind of closeness. You see, I think that it takes a different kind of sensibility to understand what he's saying, and to understand the place of solitude, okay, in a marriage, the place, how one can be both together, be oneself, how being together can at sometimes be a way of being oneself, and how one can be just in oneself and yet be together with another person, right? Um, and uh, you know, he talks about, you know, they're watching television together, um, they're laughing together, they have these kinds of moments together, right? But what he's trying to suggest is that there is a different way of thinking about the idea of togetherness, closeness, separation. So here, bottom of page 126, now we are together for the first time. We have actually become, as is often said of a happily married couple, inseparable, in a way like Ovid's Bacchus and Philemon, whom the gods gave the gift of growing old together as trees. It is a way of life that is unfamiliar. The closeness of apartness has necessarily become the closeness of closeness, and we know nothing of it. We have never had any practice. Now that we ever, not that we ever practice the opposite, the way of life, not uncommon in academy, which a philosophical friend of Iris defined by coining the word telegamy. Telegamy, marriage at a distance, works well for some people who prefer to remain an independent part of an entity. It may sharpen their satisfaction in time spent together, as well as being of practical convenience if careers are to be pursued in places far apart. But it is not, as noted by Anthony Powell, the same thing as being married. Apartness in marriage is a state of love. Apartness in marriage is a state of love and not a function of distance or preference or practicality. A goose which cannot find other geese will attach itself to some object, another animal, even a stone or a post, and never lose sight of it. This terror of being alone, of being cut off even for a few seconds from the familiar object, is a feature of Alzheimer's. So, this is how their marriage changed. That when she got Alzheimer's, right, at that time, she always wanted John around. She was terrified when her husband was away. And of course, then he tells us other things that happens in Alzheimer's, how a person repeats something that they said 5 minutes ago, wholly unaware that they had said that thing 5 minutes ago, and then repeats it again and yet again and yet again, right? And towards the end of the book, he has this, again, very funny part where he's talking about how they had gone to a party, and she's talking to this insurance man, this person who works for an insurance company. This is pages 243 to 45, right? Let me just read out a small portion of that, and within 5 minutes or so, I will wind up, right? So, they go to a party. This is when her Alzheimer's is very advanced, right? It is a nice party. Right? I marvel, as I have often done before, at the way in which guests enjoy being guests, standing opposite someone and keeping going, holding eye contact in the same practiced precarious way that one holds glass and canap, right? Okay. So he's saying a lot more now about. He's also talking about social mores and particularly the social mores and norms that one encounters in a party, like a naval battle in Nelson's times, ship to ship, yardarm to yardarm. Sometimes another ship looms up through the noise of battle, right? Should I switch targets or redouble broadsides against the present opponent, right? You're talking at a party, you're having conversation with someone, then someone comes by, right? Swings by, right? And this is what I mean. Should I switch targets? Right? There's something remorseless about the concentration required. No one wants to be drifting aimlessly through the battle, guns silent, disengaged. He's a very interesting writer and a great writer in his own right, obviously. The extraordinary thing is that Iris can serve her guns and return fire, as it were, just like everybody else. Okay? And then he has a description of that, which I won't really get into. Some people might actually find it more restful at a party to talk to someone more or less with. Um, uh, so, excuse me. Let me just go back. To this to the paragraph where she's talking with this person. All right, and she says he's a this person is giving a tremendous at this party, giving a tremendous impression of being good at his work and happy at it, half listening while at the same time engaging my own opponent closely. I overhear a lively account of the way things are done in an insurance adjustment office. Smiling, Iris listens closely. Her attention must be flattering. Then I hear her say, "What do you do?" From the face opposite her, it is evident that the question has been repeated several times in the last few minutes. Undiscouraged, he begins all over again. Some people might actually find it more restful at a party to talk to someone more or less with Iris's condition. I think I should myself. Apart from making you feel you're performing a service to the community, it is also, in the short run, less demanding and taxing than the conventional art of party intercourse, right? So, uh, when one is thinking of this book, one is thinking, as I said, of Bailey's reflections on their life together, the marriage they shared, but the particular ways in which she was always herself, and the particular ways in which he was always himself, right? He talks about her novels, about how some of the incidents in their own life are worked into the novels, right? Um, he mentions a time, just as an illustration, when he tells Iris, "What's really great about your novels?" He tells her that, right? And how does she respond? So she was not a person who was remotely, narcissistic about, and who thought the world of her own, of herself, and if someone like her husband says, "Well, I think you're a very gifted writer," she will just say, "Well, thank you very much," something like that, right? Right. On page 120, he's describing precisely that, how he's telling her that, "Look, I think, your novels are very good. This character is really very good, right? You're the only novelist I know," he writes. This is what he told her, page 120. "You're the only novelist I know who can make the whole world of art come into your novels without being laborious about it or making it seem fancy." Iris smiled. "Well, thanks very much. I don't like to think about what happens when I do it. You're the critic, not me." Remember, he's professor of English and professor of, you know, literary criticism, right? So, all in all, lovely book. Um, it has its funny moments. It has its very sad moments because, of course, one reads, and as one reads, one comes to the awareness of how Iris, is declining, right? What happens to lucidity and consciousness, right? All of that. Can one be lucid in such a way without possessing the consciousness that can produce such language? And if consciousness can go on producing such words, why not many more equally lucid? So, they're philosophical, reflections. And one of the things that comes across in this is how the memory of certain things is far more important than that event, than the experience of that event, right? So this is a book about marriage, it's about love, it's about memory, it's about togetherness, it's about social mores and social intercourse. It's a book about how one bees in the world in as elegant a fashion as one can. Elegy for Iris by John Bailey. Enjoy the book.